Vienna, 1906. Just as the first snow dusted the black roofs of Schönbrunn Palace and the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled 7. Thalina Jarett's gloved fingers trembled as she gripped the envelope, its imperial seal heavy with consequence. Her breath clouded the carriage window, blurring the golden silhouette of the Hofburg Palace ahead. She didn't look at her mother, seated rigidly across from her in sable-trimmed silence. She already knew what the letter said. Her engagement had been arranged. Again, this time, to His Grace, Duke Marek Norwood, a widowed English noble with Austrian holdings and a reputation for icy diplomacy. He was 32, intelligent, and entirely uninterested in love. The Empress had orchestrated it herself, citing strategic harmony between the Habsburg and British interests in the Balkans. Thalina was 21. She had never kissed anyone, and now she was to marry a man she had never met. She stepped out of the carriage into the cold courtyard, chin high despite the weight in her chest. Her boots crunched the snow as she followed the steward through the marble halls of the winter residence. Her silk skirts whispered around her ankles. "Your Grace is expecting you in the crimson drawing room," the steward said, bowing as he pushed open the tall doors. Marek Norwood stood by the fireplace, tall and dark-haired, dressed in a black frock coat and cravat so precisely knotted it looked sculpted. His gaze met hers sharp, unreadable, but not unkind. "Lady Thalina," he said, his voice low and precise. "You must be freezing." He moved to pour her tea without waiting for the maid. She blinked. "Your Grace, I received the Empress's letter." He handed her the cup without touching her hand. "I suspected you might." She set the cup down, untouched. "Are you forcing me to marry you, Your Grace?" There was no tremor in her voice. Her heart hammered, but her spine stayed straight. She had been raised in court, taught to smile while swallowing disappointment, to dance through duty and lie with grace. But today, she couldn't pretend. Marek looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down opposite her, folding his hands in his lap. "No," he said simply. She stared. "You're not." "I'm not," he repeated. "I agreed to the match because the Empress asked it of me. But I will not marry a woman who doesn't want me." The fire cracked between them. Outside, snow veiled the windows. Thalina's voice dropped. "You would refuse a decree from the Empress?" "I would find a way to make her change her mind." She studied him, unsure what to make of this refusal. He didn't look like a man plotting escape. He looked tired and honest. "I expected a cold diplomat," she said finally, "not a gentle refusal." His lips curved faintly. "And I expected a girl too proud to speak her mind." She almost smiled. A clock chimed in the next room. "I suppose we're both disappointed," she said. His eyes warmed. Or relieved. They left it at that. 2 weeks passed. Thalina remained at the palace under the guise of tutoring the Archduchess's youngest daughter in French. She stayed because no one had yet declared the engagement broken, and because Marek had invited her to walk the gardens once, and then again, and again after that. They never discussed the marriage again. Instead, they spoke of books, of politics, of how he missed the salt air of Dover, and how she had once almost drowned in Lake Geneva. He listened when she spoke of her late father, of how he had taught her chess, and how she hadn't played since he died. Marek brought a board the next day. One afternoon, she slipped on the icy path near the rose arbor. Marek caught her arm without hesitation, steadying her. His gloves were warm, his grip firm, but it was the way he looked at her, alarmed but silent, that made her breath catch. "You're quite reckless," he said quietly. "I was raised in a palace," she said. "We're not allowed to fall." He didn't let go until she had balanced herself again. The rumors began soon after. A chambermaid had seen them in the garden. A footman reported laughter behind the conservatory glass. The Empress summoned Marek privately. Thalina saw the tension in his jaw when he returned. "They'll push the engagement forward now," he said, standing at the window of the music salon. The snow had turned to slush on the streets below. "You could still refuse," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You said you would." He turned to her. "And if I don't want it anymore?" She froze. He stepped closer, slowly. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "But I've come to value your presence more than I ever expected. I don't want you forced into anything. But if you chose me, I would not be sorry." Her heart beat impossibly fast. She shook her head, eyes bright. "They'll say I did it for influence. That I trapped you. I don't care what they say." She looked up at him, lips parted. "Then let me choose. Not today, But let me decide. He nodded once. As you wish. One night, she found a letter tucked beneath her tea dish, written in a steadier hand than she expected. No signature. I saw you refuse him. You'll regret it. She turned cold. The handwriting was familiar. Her rejected former suitor, Count Elias Hollenberg, a man twice her age who had once tried to corner her during a summer ball. She had slapped him. That had been the end of it, or so she thought. She said nothing to Marek. 2 days later, word came. Elias had challenged Marek to a duel at dawn. She burst into Marek's study without knocking. You cannot fight him. He looked up from his desk, composed as always. He insulted your honor. I will not let it stand. It's not my honor I'm afraid for, she said, voice breaking. It's your life. His expression softened. I'll be careful. That's not enough. She stepped closer, fist clenched. You're not just some match they gave me. You matter to me. Do you understand? He did not speak. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her cheek with the back of his hand. It was the first time he'd touched her skin. I understand, he said. The duel was held in secret, in a clearing beyond the palace gardens. Thalina watched from behind an oak, breath shallow, as the first shots rang out. Elias missed. Marek did not. He didn't kill him, shot him cleanly through the shoulder, enough to end the matter. When it was done, he walked to her without a word, blood on his sleeve, pale but standing. She didn't wait. She ran to him, threw her arms around his neck. You absolute fool, she whispered. He held her close. You asked me not to force you. So I won't. But I will protect you. Always. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Then you should know. I've made my choice. He blinked. I choose you, she said. Freely. And then she kissed him, in the snow, as the sun rose. The duel's aftermath settled into silence. A physician from the military hospital had come under the Empress's seal, stitched Elias Hollenberg's shoulder without ceremony, and departed. No inquiries were made. No charges filed. The matter, as Marek predicted, had been smoothed over with brisk diplomacy and a discreet donation to Elias's estate. Thalina had not spoken to her mother in 2 days. In the quiet hours after the duel, she remained in Marek's wing of the palace. Not out of impropriety, her maid accompanied her at all times, but because the Empress issued no directives and no summons arrived. The absence of royal interference was its own strange permission. It was Marek who broke the silence between them. I've arranged a carriage to take us to the Semmering Pass, he said one morning, folding a map along its worn creases. We'll leave before first light. She lifted her gaze from the embroidery in her lap. Why? There's someone I want you to meet. The journey south wound through pine forests and across bridges suspended above sheer valleys. As they climbed higher, the air thinned and brightened. Snow clung to the granite cliffs in soft drifts, untouched by the city's soot. Marek sat beside her, not speaking unless spoken to, his hands resting quietly on his knees. When they arrived, Thalina stepped down into a silence so complete it made her ears ring. The convent rose pale and severe against the slope, its chapel bell long rusted quiet. A Benedictine nun greeted them at the gate and led them through stone corridors that smelled of beeswax and old paper. They stopped before a narrow wooden door. Inside, an elderly woman sat at a table, her spine curved but her chin lifted. Her dark eyes were the same shape as Marek's. Your Grace, she said, inclining her head. Marek stepped forward and kissed her hand. Mother. Thalina's chest tightened. He turned. This is Lady Thalina Jarett. The older woman studied her in silence. I've heard your name. You refused the first engagement, she said, her voice dry but not unkind. Good. Thalina tried to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. I suppose I was fortunate that your son agreed. You were wise, she said. He's stubborn, but he listens when it matters. After tea served in worn porcelain, so thin the light passed through it, they walked the chapel gardens, enclosed by frost-bitten hedges. The old woman leaned on Marek's arm, but moved steadily. She took the veil after my father's death, Marek said quietly. Not out of grief, she never loved him. But she said she wanted silence. Said Vienna had too many rooms, and none of them were honest. Thalina looked at the woman's back, at the way her veil moved with the wind. Is that where your honesty comes from? His breath steamed in the air between them. Perhaps. She taught me to speak plainly, but not always aloud. They did not stay the night. As the sky bruised into evening, they took the same road down, the horses careful on the icy turns. Marek slept against the window, one gloved hand resting beside hers on the seat cushion. She didn't move it, but she didn't pull away either. Back at Schönbrunn, the Empress's summons waited. Her chamberlain greeted them at the carriage with a bow. His Grace may return to his apartments. Her Imperial Majesty requests Lady Thalina's presence alone. The Empress stood by the hearth in a gown of sapphire silk, her hair coiled into a crown of braids heavy with jet pins. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "You've been absent." Thalina sat, spine straight. "Yes, Your Majesty. You've been seen in Marek's company alone, frequently, and without a chaperone on several occasions." Thalina said nothing. The Empress studied her. "You are aware of the consequence if this engagement is broken without cause." "I am. And yet you chose not to withdraw, nor to secure the match formally. You linger." Thalina's fingers curled in her lap. "Because I was waiting to be certain." "Are you certain now?" She met the Empress's gaze. "Yes." The Empress's eyes narrowed. "You could have been Duchess months ago." "I didn't want a title. I wanted truth." Silence stretched between them. Then the Empress exhaled through her nose, sharp and precise. "You've inherited your father's obstinacy, but not without his discernment." She turned to the window. "The wedding will be held in Linz. Quietly. He has no kin to speak of, and your mother will be satisfied with a cathedral and the right guests." She looked back. "Do not disappoint me, Thalina." "I won't." When she left the study, the corridor outside was empty. She walked until her feet took her to the yellow drawing room where Marek waited, seated by the window, reading. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "She agreed," she said. He looked up. "Then it's real." She stepped inside. "It's real." He rose slowly, setting the book aside. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "No." He took a step toward her. "Not even now." She shook her head, eyes steady. "Especially now." He reached for her hand not with urgency, but with reverence. She let him take it, and he brought it to his lips. "I will do everything I can to make this life gentle for you." She smiled, for the first time without hesitation. "Then let's begin." The train to Linz shuddered gently as it wound along the Danube, iron wheels humming against the track. Thalina sat beside the window, her gloves folded neatly in her lap, eyes on the river's slow, pewter current. Across from her, Marek read from a worn volume in French, the same one he'd been carrying since they left Vienna at dawn. Neither had spoken for the last hour, but the silence between them was no longer awkward. It had settled, like snow on branches, quiet, necessary. The wedding would take place in 3 days' time at the Baroque Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. The Empress had approved the guest list herself, omitting half the court under the guise of discretion. Thalina's mother had arrived in Linz ahead of them, accompanied by her lady's maid and a valet, and had sent no word since. Thalina turned from the window. "Did you ever imagine you'd marry in Austria?" Marek didn't glance up. "I imagined I wouldn't marry at all." She studied him. "Because of the way your parents lived?" He nodded once, closing the book. "They taught me that affection could be a performance. I had no interest in performing." She hesitated. "And now?" "I trust you," he said. "That changes everything." His words were quiet, but they rooted deep. She looked at his hand resting near the edge of his seat, not reaching for hers, not demanding but there. Present. "I still don't know what kind of wife I'll be," she said. "I'd rather discover that with you than with anyone else." When they arrived at the Hoffman estate where the Empress had arranged their lodging, the staff waited with gloved hands and downcast eyes. The manor had belonged to a minor countess who had died the previous winter, and though it bore the chill of vacancy, the fireplaces had been lit and the linens freshly pressed. Marek's rooms were in the east wing, hers in the west. They dined together in the music room, the long table left unadorned save for a pair of silver candlesticks and a single bowl of preserved figs. After the meal, Thalina lingered by the harpsichord, her fingers trailing over the keys. "You play?" Marek asked, still seated. "Not since I was 16. My instructor said my expression was too restrained." He stood, walked to her side. "May I hear for myself?" She sat down, adjusted her posture, and began a slow courant in D minor. Her fingers faltered once, then found the rhythm again. When she finished, he said nothing, only looked at her for a long moment, then offered his hand to help her rise. The following morning, a letter arrived from Marek's solicitor in London, delivered by a courier who had traveled through the night. Thalina saw him reading it on the terrace, the wind lifting the edge of his coat. No trouble, I hope, she said, stepping beside him. None, he replied. Only confirmation. He handed her the letter. She read quickly, her brows lifting. The deed had been executed. Marek had signed over a parcel of land near Dover to an orphanage run by the Sisters of Mercy, one she remembered him mentioning only once, in passing. You didn't have to do this, she said. They'd have accepted a donation. I've kept that land untouched for years. I thought I was preserving something, but it was only inherited guilt. She folded the letter carefully. You're not the man your father was. I know, but I needed to prove it to myself. That evening, she walked the gallery alone. The manor's oil portraits peered down at her, unfamiliar nobles with powdered wigs and heavy-lidded eyes. She paused before a painting of a young woman in a green velvet gown, seated beside a greyhound, her expression unreadable. Marek found her there. She was the countess's daughter, he said. Died of a fever at 20. She looked so unfinished. He nodded, like she had more to say. Thalina drew a breath. Would it dishonor her, do you think, if we used this house again? After the wedding. She has no heirs, Marek replied. And I can think of no better way to honor the dead than to fill their halls with life. She turned to him, heart rising. I want to keep it. I want this to be our beginning, not just a stop between cities. Then it shall be, he said. The day before the ceremony, Marek came to her door just after dusk. Her maid had stepped out to fetch a hair comb, and she was alone, brushing her shawl by the fire. He didn't enter, only stood in the doorway. I meant to ask you something before the ceremony, he said. But I've waited too long. She set her brush down. Ask, do you want to keep your name? She blinked. What? I'll not assume. If you want to remain Lady Jarett in court or in correspondence, I'll make it known. She rose slowly. You'd allow that? I'd support it. She crossed the room to him. Then let me take your name in private. For letters. For our house. But in court, I'll stay as I am. Not for pride. For memory. He inclined his head. Then we are agreed. Her hand hovered near his sleeve. We've never danced. No, he said. We haven't. She took his hand, guiding him into the empty space before the hearth, and without music, they moved. Slowly, barely more than a sway. But it was enough. Marek's voice was quiet. You know, I never imagined someone would choose me freely. She rested her head near his shoulder. And I never imagined that freedom could feel like this. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, soundless, certain. The nave of the cathedral was silent in the minutes before the ceremony, save for the faint rustle of vestments and the distant creak of a door closing somewhere in the sacristy. A gray light filtered through the upper windows, softening the gold filigree along the apse and diffusing the scent of wax and cedar. Thalina stood in the vestry behind a carved oak screen, her gown falling in pale folds around her ankles, a mantilla of Brussels lace pinned to her hair. Her hands were steady. I expected to feel smaller, she said, adjusting the cuff of her glove. The Archduchess's companion, an older woman lent for the occasion, smiled without condescension. That's how you know you've chosen well. Thalina didn't reply. She was listening not for music, not for footsteps, but for the absence of doubt. Across the chancel, Marek stood beside the high pulpit, his coat buttoned with military precision, a silver watch chain catching a glint of mourning. He wore no decoration save for the signet ring of his mother's family, newly engraved. When the bishop entered, Marek inclined his head, but his eyes remained on the arch near the vestry. The organ began not a triumphal march, but a restrained allemande in G major. Thalina stepped forward alone, her mother seated already in the front pew, her face unreadable. The aisle was long, but she did not rush. Each step felt like language, a sentence she had rehearsed fully, now spoken aloud. When she reached him, Marek offered his hand. His palm was neither cold nor warm, but firm, unshaking. He didn't speak, not even when the bishop began the rite in stilted Latin. But when the moment came to declare his vow, his voice was clear and deliberate. I give myself to you freely, he said. Her reply was quiet but unwavering. And I receive you freely, without reserve. No applause followed, no dramatic kiss. Only the soft murmur of prayer and the faintest release of held breath from the pews. In the sacristy after the blessing, Marek removed his gloves and touched her cheek with reverence, not claim. You didn't hesitate, he said. I did, she replied, but not today. They left the cathedral without a formal procession, taking a closed carriage through narrow streets still wet from snowfall. The reception was held in the west drawing room of the estate, where a fire had been lit and mulled wine served in porcelain cups painted with cornflowers. The Empress had sent a single letter of congratulations, sealed in imperial red, signed only with her initials. Thalina placed it in the drawer of the escritoire without comment. The guests were few: a merchant's daughter who had once been Thalina's music partner, a retired colonel who had served beside Marek's uncle, a quiet couple from the provincial court who brought a carved box of Tyrolean glass as a gift. There were no speeches, only the clink of spoons on porcelain and the low murmur of conversation. Later, as twilight deepened, Thalina stepped onto the east terrace, wrapping a wool shawl over her shoulders. Marek joined her, carrying a folded piece of paper. "The notary delivered this earlier," he said, handing it to her. She opened it. The deed to the Lynn's estate had been transferred to both their names. "You kept your promise," she said. He rested his hands on the stone balustrade. "I meant every word. I'll keep it open through the winter," she said. "We'll let the air move through the rooms. It'll take time to make it ours. I have time." She looked out across the snow-covered hills, the city roofs below glowing with lantern light. "We'll need staff. A steward. A cook. Someone to tend the grounds. I've written to my mother's cousin. She knows whom to trust." Thalina turned to him. "You thought of that already? I think of all the things that might make it easier for you to stay." She reached for his hand, not out of ceremony, but to confirm what was already settled. He let her take it, and they stood without speaking, listening to the muffled ring of a sleigh bell somewhere on the road below. In the days that followed, the manor shifted. Rugs were unrolled. Shelves were filled. The kitchen was stocked with dried pears and rye flour. A housekeeper arrived from Graz, married to a former soldier with a limp and a gentle way of speaking to their dog. Thalina walked the perimeter each morning, noting the soft rod in the stables, the broken hinge on the south gate. Marek repaired both himself, after supper, without fanfare. One night, as they sat by the fire in the library, her reading a letter from her cousin in Trieste, him drawing a schematic for the roof's drainage, she spoke without looking up. "I'd like to plant something in spring. Not for show. Something useful." He dipped his pen and nodded. "What would you choose? Chamomile. Leeks. Perhaps sage." He glanced at her then, a subtle question in his eyes. She met it with quiet certainty. "I don't want a life that looks like anyone else's. I want one that works." Marek folded the paper and leaned back. "Then we'll build it. Every part." She closed her letter and placed it beside the lamp. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," he said. "Hard, but simple." Outside, the wind stirred the ivy along the manor's eaves. Inside, the fire held steady, casting gold across the floorboards. In that room, without pageantry or proclamation, their life began.